Three quick questions. Technological unemployment and falling rate of profit. Now, both of these things still affect this particular process, right? I mean, the worker co-op issue is still susceptible to both, meaning there's no situation where, despite, for example, Uber, Uber will get to the point where it get those cars to be automated. That's what they want. That's that's the dream. That's the wet dream of these guys. Because ultimately, you can fire all the workers and all the cabs and all of the drivers, and just have a car that's solar powered that just kind of drives around town and picks people up. Never have to, you may have to clean it, but beyond that, it's an automated process. The worker need not apply. So you have several 100,000 people lose their jobs, maybe even more. Not necessarily overnight, but eventually they go away. Same thing with places like Walmart or supermarkets, where Amazon now delivers groceries to people's house. That's going to be a process that continues, where refrigerators get to the point where you can analyze what's in the refrigerator, sends a request, and somebody, that Uber comes, drops it off to your door. No worker need apply. You walk down the lines, they've already started to automate the checkout lines where you don't have to deal with a person if you don't want to deal with a person. This process is going to continue. I mean, you're going to get to the point where a large segment of the population in regards to jobs are going to be automated. And even under the model of worker co-ops, aren't those worker co-ops still susceptible? And the secondary part to that, falling rate of profit.
Well, Jamarl, let me respond to the technology and then we get to the profit, okay? All right. The way to explain this is, again, to give a simple illustration that I think anybody can understand. Let's suppose we have just bear with me here. Suppose we have an enterprise that has 100 workers, and it doesn't matter what they're making. They could be making toothbrushes or software programs or whatever. So we have 100 workers and they're working. And the company that employs them sells the output, makes money. And let's use an example, toothbrushes. What difference does it make, right? And now imagine a technological change comes along that makes every worker in the toothbrush factory twice as productive as they used to be. What does a capitalist employer do when such a machine gets invented or becomes available?
Fires workers.
Good. If he buys a machine, lays off 50 of his 100 workers, because the remaining 50 with the new machine can produce just as many toothbrushes as he used to need 100 workers to produce. And why does he do it? Well, let's stay with the simple example. He now has the machine. He doesn't have to pay half the workers because he fired them. He produces the same number of toothbrushes, sells them for the same price, gets in the same amount of revenue, but where before he had to take out of that revenue the salaries of the 50 workers who he used to have to work there, he now keeps that money because he fired those 50 guys, and so he can keep that money for himself. It's more profit for him, and he's in the business of making profit, so that's what he does. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, imagine a worker co-op. Worker co-op let's just say again, it's 100 workers making toothbrushes. They, like the capitalists, discover there's a new machine. It's twice as productive. And they say, wow, every worker can now produce twice as many toothbrushes as before. But they don't make a profit because for them, there's an alternative that makes even more sense. They don't fire anybody. They declare that the working day is going to be reduced from 8 hours to 4. Because that way, with a new machine, in 4 hours, you can produce exactly as many toothbrushes as before you needed 8 hours to do. And so they'll all keep their jobs. They'll all work 4 hours a day. They'll produce the same number of toothbrushes. They'll sell them at the same price. They'll bring in the same amount of money, which they will distribute to the workers just as they did before. You have a technical change, but the beneficiary isn't the capitalist with more profit. It's the workers with more leisure. That's always a choice. In capitalism, that second choice never gets made because the capitalist has no incentive to do that.
You know, the wild part about it is not just never made, the media never brings it up. Like,
That's
it's
right.
never even on the table.
Right. So when I teach my economics classes, I take an entire hour and slowly go through this example on the board so that my students will never forget it, because it's very important. Americans, particularly, because I've been an American all my life, Americans think that technology is dangerous because it loses your job. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's not the technology that cost you your job. It's capitalism that cost you your job. The technology could have been used not only for you to keep your job, but to have more leisure to spend with your family, to spend with your hobbies, to undertake new and interesting things in your life that could make your life infinitely more pleasurable, more productive, have your relationships go deeper. That's what human beings ought to be concerned about. And by the way, just a little footnote, if the way you incorporate technology is by giving all the workers leisure rather than the capitalist profit, that's more democratic. There's lots of workers who benefit with leisure. There's very few employers who benefit from the profit. So if only democracy were in your mind, that's another reason not to use technology in a capitalist way. And if you understand that, you understand that capitalism is the enemy of a democratic system of using technology.
Yes, yes, technology should be a liberating experience.
Exactly.
And we have it attacking.
The irony is everybody really knows that. If you go back for hundreds of years, inventors, when you ask the inventors who come up with a new, Thomas Edison invents a light bulb. The stories inventors like to tell is how much of our labor we can save now. We don't have to run around with kerosene. We can turn a switch and the light is on. It improves our life. The rationale of technical change was improving people's lives. For 300 years, capitalism has said, if only we have more machinery, our lives will be easier. Workers today work more hours than they did 50 years ago. They're more exhausted than they ever been before. They're rendered unhealthy by their work pressures. So capitalism has been unable to distribute democratically anything like the benefits that technology made possible, but that were used for the profit of the few rather than for the benefit of the many.
Under that example, if a worker co-op decided that they were going to allow the people to take more time off, and one of the other worker co-ops that was also, let's say, or capitalist organization, they decided to instead cut prices, meaning those widgets are sold, let's say, for half of the price. Wouldn't it force the other company to also do something similar? This gets to this kind of argument of the falling rate of profit. Wouldn't those organizations still be susceptible to that particular model? Or am I wrong on this?
No. I think you're absolutely right. You don't have to have, you can make it a very simple example. Imagine there were two worker co-ops and one of them decided they wanted to become bigger. Let's put aside why, but let's assume they wanted to become bigger. So they lowered the price, hoping that people would buy their product rather than the product of the other worker co-op. Okay, you're going to have to come up with a plan now what to do. The second worker co-op can imitate this. They can drop the price too, but then both worker co-ops are going to have less revenue for whatever it is they need to do as companies than they would have had otherwise. In other words, they're going to have to work out rules of competition. Otherwise, they're going to become each other's enemies. By the way, that's exactly what capitalism has done.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. In the history of capitalism, What you just described has happened 1,000 times. One company wants to defeat another one, making, I don't know, hot dogs. It doesn't matter. So the first company drops its price. The second company doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to give up the profit, doesn't want to give up. So the second company goes out of business because everybody shifts and buys hot dogs from the company that lowered the price. Okay, the company that lowered the price, why does it do that? It does it because when the other companies that it has defeated by this strategy go out of business, it'll be left as the only hot dog company left standing, and then they can recoup all their losses by jacking up the price because everybody will have to pay because there's nobody else. That's how monopolies got set up. Companies attacking each other in these ways, hoping that, yes, it costs them something, and what did we do as a people? We said, we don't want this. We don't want there to be one company. So we passed laws, you can't do that. That's exactly what worker co-ops would do. They would get together to pass laws to regulate how they interact with one another when the social consequences of their interactions are unwanted. So we have laws. We have the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. We had, one after another. And they worked for a while. Then companies get around them. Then you have to have another law. It's disgusting. That's another story. But with worker co-ops, they also would have to develop rules governing their interaction. Look, there's no system that is sort of, you set it in motion and it's perfect. It solves all problems. That's a fantasy. Nobody is saying that the worker co-op is some final stage of human history. It's just a shitload better than capitalism, yes. And that's enough. It's like, let me use an example that some people may bother some people, but I'm going to use it anyway.
Go for it.
All right. In the fight against human slavery, both in the United States and elsewhere in the world, enthusiastic anti-slavery people became poetic in imagining what freedom, what the end of slavery would mean for people, right? And their poetry went, we would all be equal and we would treat each other like equal human beings. Now, we know from hindsight that it's one thing to get rid of slavery, but the end of slavery doesn't mean nirvana. We're still going to have some problem. That doesn't mean that the fight for slavery was a mistake. That was a very important victory to get rid of that. But it's not the end. There's still problems that are left. There are things we have to fight for. And for me, worker co-op is not some heaven on earth. Yeah. It's just a hell of a lot better. It solves a bunch of problems that need to be solved. And it allows us to be in a better place to solve the other problems that remain than we are now. I mean, I think it's crazy. We keep trying to do something about inequality, whereas we have an economic system that keeps making inequality.
It produces it, yeah.
Stupid. It's a kind of craziness to keep doing this. And I think worker co-ops take a big step in the direction of massively reducing the inequality that we suffer from. Does that mean that everything about worker co-ops will be beautiful? No. There'll be tensions and problems, and the worker co-ops are going to have to figure out how to solve that. But that's not an argument.
That's not an argument against it at all. That was when I think about this, I try to think through what does it mean? Like, what does it look like? That's the only reason I asked the question. It's not an argument against it. I've already told you had me at hello with this particular one. All right, the last